Bene, buonasera a tutti. Stiamo aspettando il rettore Geuna che arriverà tra poco, forse in arrivo, no? Sta arrivando? È arrivato? No, non è ancora. Però comunque arriva, ci ha assicurato che ci arriva e quindi inizierò io a introdurre questa giornata. Intanto vi saluto tutti, saluto naturalmente per primi gli studenti perché questa giornata è dedicata a loro, l'apertura dell'anno accademico è l'apertura di un anno di lavoro e di studio, molti di loro fra l'altro fanno dei corsi che durano un anno, gli studenti di master, e quindi questo è diciamo un periodo, sarà tutto il periodo che passeranno al collegio. Io e poi naturalmente saluto tutti voi che siete venuti qua oggi, stasera, ad ascoltare Raffaella Sadun. Raffaella, io sono molto fiero perché Raffaella non solo è la nostra relatrice oggi, ma è anche la vicepresidente del Collegio Carlo Alberto. Mi dice che non lo sapeva.
Però di essere nel board.
Però no, invece lei è assolutamente la vicepresidente con Laura Scomparin, che non vedo, anche lei è la prorettrice, quindi diciamo il lato rettorale ci manca, ma adesso arriva. Allora, io volevo, oltre a salutarvi, volevo darvi due numeri sul collegio, perché l'apertura dell'anno accademico è anche un momento per fare un bilancio. E per il collegio, fra l'altro, è un momento cruciale perché noi stiamo per compiere 20 anni e noi abbiamo un ventennio glorioso, niente a che vedere con altri ventenni con cui non vogliamo avere niente a che fare, ma questo è sicuramente il nostro, un ventennio glorioso. E per spiegarlo e raccontarlo, mi prendo 5 minuti, voglio partire da una cosa che mi è successa. La settimana scorsa ero a Parigi, c'era un convegno del CPR, che è il network europeo principale dei ricercatori europei, e viene da me Ugo Panizza, che è un nostro collega che sta a Ginevra, molto simpatico, che è un fellow del Carlo Alberto. Ciao Carlo. Allora Panizza mi dice: guarda, una sorpresa per te. E dico: ah bene, dico, che sorpresa hai? Guarda, è uscito questo paper, ho trovato questo paper che è uscito da un po' di questo nostro collega che ha fatto un'analisi su chi sono le rising star, le grandi star nel mercato degli economisti in America. Chi sono questi giovani, che sono i giovani che hanno avuto le offerte migliori, che stanno facendo benissimo sul mercato del lavoro. E diceva a me, gli ho chiesto allora di dirmi quanti sono gli italiani e chi sono gli italiani. Allora ti do i dati. I dati dicono che questi hanno selezionato 179 rising star in un triennio, ok? 80 erano americani, 20 erano tedeschi, 15 erano italiani, quindi i terzi erano gli italiani. Questa già è una soddisfazione nazionale. Mi spiace non c'è ancora il rettore perché gli farà piacere sentire quello che dico. E allora dico: vabbè, ma chi sono questi italiani? E si dice, gliel'ho chiesto e mi ha dato l'elenco. Allora dice: questi 15 sono 8 della Bocconi, 6 del Collegio Carlo Alberto e 1 di Tor Vergata. Sto aspettando il rettore, adesso glielo ricordiamo al rettore, però, e questo veramente era una bella sorpresa. Fra l'altro non me ne posso vantare perché lo studio era stato fatto su un periodo che era precedente alla mia presidenza, quindi non è assolutamente merito mio, è merito dello straordinario lavoro che fa la faculty, che la faculty ha fatto e soprattutto che sta continuando a fare per consolidare questa istituzione e metterla sulla mappa internazionale, che è un lavoro difficile, che richiede pazienza, su cui bisogna lavorare mattone dopo mattone per costruire una reputazione istituzionale. Allora, però, il pensiero che uno fa e dice: ah, però, sì, fantastico, però che peccato i soliti italiani che se ne vanno, no? I nostri migliori vanno all'estero, eccetera. Invece, devo dirvi che noi facciamo un lavoro proprio grazie al nostro posizionamento internazionale. Ecco Stefano, ciao Stefano. Adesso ripeto quello che ho detto. No, devo ripetere questa cosa che devi sapere perché è importantissima. Che tra i 15, devi andare lì, i 15 italiani che sono rising star sul mercato del lavoro degli economisti internazionali in America, ce n'è 8 della Bocconi e 6 del Collegio Carlo Alberto, Università di Torino. Sei contento? Ecco. Va bene, però oltre, naturalmente le persone vanno via e devo dire che invece la cosa fondamentale di essere noi in grado di formare queste persone che vanno in giro per il mondo è che poi questo ci crea una reputazione che ci permette di attrarre i cervelli. Adesso vi faccio vedere una slide che forse, eccola qua. Questo è il nostro job market, cioè quello che noi facciamo quando andiamo in giro per il mondo a reclutare gli assistant professor che invece vengono a lavorare al Collegio Carlo Alberto. Noi abbiamo questo è il triennio 2020-2022, abbiamo 4 posizioni a cui hanno fatto domanda 1562 potenziali candidati, no? Per dirvi l'attrattività del collegio. Però da dove arrivano questi? Guardate, 40 e più per cento arrivano dagli Stati Uniti, il 10% arrivano dal Regno Unito, il 7% dalla Francia, cioè arrivano non da paesi periferici, arrivano dalle migliori università del mondo, no? E quindi è importante proprio capire questo nesso tra la capacità di creare dei ragazzi bravissimi che vanno in giro per il mondo e la capacità allo stesso tempo di attrarre dei talenti che sono in grado di venire da noi, e questo poi si vede nei risultati effettivi che noi abbiamo, perché ci sono dei numeri che riguardano quello che è, diciamo, la nostra faculty e l'evoluzione del gruppo di ricercatori del collegio, che sono oggi 11 persone più senior, quindi che hanno posizioni di chair, e 11 che hanno posizioni di junior, ma compresi tutti i fellows e affiliates dell'Università di Torino che lavorano al collegio. Noi, come sapete, lavoriamo in modo molto stretto con l'università, come dirà dopo il nostro rettore, aiutati e finanziati dalla Compagnia di San Paolo, come dirà dopo Alberto, però questa connessione ci permette di costruire una community di ricercatori che oggi raggiunge il numero di circa 70 persone, no? E che lavora molto bene e che fa delle cose ottime. I risultati che abbiamo in termini, ad esempio, di pubblicazioni sono fantastici. Nel triennio 2020-2023 è aumentato di 46% il numero delle pubblicazioni, ne sono state fatte 367 su riviste internazionali. Vuol dire che il collegio e la sua faculty ogni 3 giorni sforna un paper che va pubblicato su una rivista accademica internazionale. Abbiamo oggi una comunità ogni anno circa di 200-250 studenti tra i master, gli allievi e il programma di PhD, e soprattutto, e poi, come sta succedendo oggi, abbiamo aumentato moltissimo il numero di eventi che facciamo, perché noi crediamo moltissimo non solo nella formazione e nella ricerca, ma moltissimo nella divulgazione, una divulgazione che è fondata sulla ricerca. E vi dico, nello scorso triennio, quando vediamo i numeri ci spaventiamo, abbiamo fatto 607 eventi, quindi uno ogni 2 giorni, e nell'ultimo anno ne abbiamo fatti 211, con 7.500 partecipanti tutto insieme, no? Quindi sono numeri molto molto incoraggianti sul 2023. Tutti dicono che c'è l'inizio della recessione, si parla di soft landing, noi abbiamo fatto un hard rising, no? Perché veramente siamo saliti molto molto rapidamente. Abbiamo naturalmente tutto questo, richiede poi un'evoluzione in quelli che sono i programmi e i progetti. Abbiamo molti programmi nuovi, abbiamo per esempio lanciato un data lab, già da un anno abbiamo lanciato un data lab. Un data lab vuol dire ricerca fondata sui dati, che lavora sia in campo macroeconomico, quindi forecasting di tipo macro, sia lavorando sui dati micro delle imprese. Le imprese hanno, come sanno i nostri amici che partecipano alle nostre attività, hanno un patrimonio di dati assolutamente colossali sui quali è possibile fare delle ricerche straordinarie, e a volte le aziende stesse non pensano come poterli usare, no? Proprio perché ovviamente li usano per la loro attività e magari non si rendono conto di quanto invece questi dati sono dati fondamentali per riuscire a fare delle analisi e dei lavori che hanno delle implicazioni molto più grandi. Quindi Data Lab da un lato, e dall'altro stiamo sviluppando molto la Impact Evaluation Unit, una unit che fa analisi di impatto su quelli che sono i progetti di vario tipo, i progetti pubblici. Fra l'altro la professoressa Sadun di nuovo in questo senso ci sta aiutando, perché l'unità che fa l'analisi di impatto del grande progetto che si chiama Repubblica Digitale, di cui Raffaella è presidente del comitato scientifico, ha sede presso il Carlo Alberto, e questo vuol dire andare a valutare tutti i progetti pubblici in ambito digitale che il governo farà con i fondi del PNRR. Naturalmente non è mai facile, ma insomma è un'attività molto importante. Abbiamo per esempio adesso fatto un accordo con questa università indiana che si chiama Ashoka, che è vicino a Delhi, perché abbiamo varie persone con noi che lavorano su temi di sviluppo e con loro possiamo fare analisi di impatto anche non solo su progetti italiani come quelli di Raffaella eccetera, ma anche su progetti fatti in paesi in via di sviluppo, in particolare in India, che è un paese in espansione e in crescita straordinaria, e quindi stiamo veramente lavorando su queste cose. Quindi un sacco di novità al collegio, i dati sono buoni, eccetera. E voglio fare un annuncio, mi fa piacere, oggi lo annuncio ufficialmente, mi fa piacere perché qui c'è il professor Grospietro, avremo dall'anno prossimo 2 nuove cattedre in TESA che ci permetterà in ambito macroeconomico e finance, che ci permetteranno di fare hiring ancora meglio di questi professori che atterriamo dall'estero. Quindi ringrazio moltissimo Intesa per la generosità di finanziare queste cattedre. Guardo naturalmente Intesa San Paolo, scusa, sì, hai ragione, Intesa San Paolo, volevo dire, San Paolo Intesa, no, Intesa San Paolo, e assolutamente questo per noi è molto importante, vi ci aiuta proprio in queste attività di data lab e crea delle interconnessioni tra diciamo, quello che si fa al collegio e il lavoro delle aziende. Naturalmente saremo molto felici di esplorare possibilità di cattedre anche con altre istituzioni torinesi e altre aziende torinesi. Ecco, quindi io, scusate, ho parlato fin troppo, ma però questi risultati mi paiono risultati importantissimi e lascio la parola forse a Alberto, che tu hai un tema, devi scappare, e poi Stefano. Grazie mille a voi e benvenuti.
Sì. Grazie Giorgio, io sarò breve, vorrei rivolgermi direttamente alla componente diciamo studentesca, nel senso che per 2 motivi. Uno, per diciamo berlusconizzarmi un attimo e dire sono uno di voi, perché feci il master anch'io in economia intorno al 2011. Nella mia inaugurazione dell'anno accademico la lecture venne tenuta dal professor Garibaldi sul mercato del lavoro, e a più di 10 anni di distanza questa esperienza è comunque una delle più formative, a cui devo dire grazie diciamo per quello che poi è stata la mia carriera, che mi ha portato in questa posizione oggi. E il secondo motivo, e penso sia importante, utile insomma per voi, magari alcuni di voi lo sanno già, ma avere 2 parole, avere 2 elementi di contesto su che cos'è la Compagnia di San Paolo, no? Cos'è la Fondazione, che condivide un pezzo di nome con la banca, e saluto il Presidente, ma che noi ogni tanto giochiamo, no? A dire che è la banca che è di origine fondazionale, no? Non è la fondazione di origine bancaria, perché ovviamente, anzi di origini fondazionali, perché oltre alla Compagnia di San Paolo ci sono altre fondazioni nel DNA della banca, e il DNA della banca lo dimostra poi nelle attività che svolge e la traiettoria che ha. Ma quindi è una fondazione puramente filantropica, che ha più di 100 persone che lavorano al proprio interno e che ogni anno dispiega diciamo 150-160 milioni di euro di grant, di fondo perduto sul territorio che è il Piemonte, la Liguria e la Valle d'Aosta, e lo fa secondo 3 obiettivi, no? Cultura, persone e pianeta. Dico questo per dirvi che quindi è una fondazione che ha un ampio spettro di attività, che va dal sociale all'educazione, all'housing, passando per la cultura, intesa anche come conservazione dei beni, ma anche come partecipazione civica, fino ad arrivare alla sanità, l'ambiente, la ricerca e l'innovazione. Dentro questo ambito qua sicuramente si colloca il sostegno a una istituzione che è anche un nostro ente strumentale, quindi è una nostra costola, che è il Collegio Carlo Alberto. È una cosa che in Europa capita abbastanza, che fondazioni grandi, penso alla Caixa in Spagna, Gulbenkian in Portogallo, il Novo Nordisk in Danimarca per esempio, generino dei centri di ricerca. Noi in questo caso l'abbiamo fatto in partnership con l'Università di Torino e garantiamo quello che è il core budget, no? Una parte di finanziamento. Ma certamente non ci fermiamo lì, no? Non è una fondazione che, lasciatemi dire, stacca un assegno una volta all'anno, ma è una fondazione che cerca di mettere pensiero, di dare un contributo, di un accompagnamento verso quello che noi chiamiamo uno sviluppo sostenibile dei territori. E in questo senso, diciamo, si sposa benissimo il tema di cui poi oggi si parlerà, perché chiaramente il tema del reskilling, e quindi richiama a tutto il grande tema del fatto che durante la vita occorre, diciamo, entrare in formazione più volte e mantenere, anzi evitare l'obsolescenza delle conoscenze. Il tema dell'intelligenza artificiale come potenziale, non leva, ma anche come elemento, insomma, in qualche modo da governare o da capire, ma in questo caso qua come assolutamente leva positiva di sviluppo, sono delle cose che non solo, diciamo, noi guardiamo con interesse, ma di cui cerchiamo di essere anche promotori. Abbiamo dei bandi sull'intelligenza artificiale in cui abbiamo, diciamo, finanziato in 2 edizioni più di 6 milioni di euro proprio per realizzare progetti di questo tipo, e abbiamo tutta un'attività, come dicevamo con la professoressa Sadun, sulle politiche attive del lavoro, e quindi il tema reskilling, upskilling e poi, diciamo, lotta alla fenomenologia dei NEET, che è veramente molto importante. Ecco, quindi per tutte queste ragioni qua ovviamente siamo molto contenti, anche orgogliosi, diciamo, di dove si trova il collegio oggi e di poter ascoltare, io non lo potrò fare, ma insomma ci sarà modo, la lecture di oggi. Grazie.
Grazie Giorgio per l'invito, ovviamente in qualità di co-soci con la Fondazione. Ringrazio ovviamente anche Alberto e Compagnia di San Paolo, tutte e tutti. Io parto dagli studenti, ma poi mi voglio in realtà rivolgere anche all'intera comunità degli stakeholder, delle colleghe e dei colleghi, ma il primo saluto ovviamente va a voi, perché siamo l'università, ed è bello che l'università ci sarà in tante parti d'Europa, ma in Italia non ne so, ce ne siano tante di fondazioni che mettano in atto attività di questo tipo, in cui in modo assolutamente paritario, come si dice oggi, una commissione paritetiche, 50-50, insieme collaboriamo a un'iniziativa che sta crescendo sempre più nel tempo, quindi sicuramente un grande gioco di squadra e quindi buon anno accademico a tutte e a tutti, e a nome anche della componente accademica, in particolare del nostro Ateneo, ma non solo. Abbiamo sentito la caratteristica del collegio è quello di avere un altissimo grado di, posso chiamarla deprovincializzazione, cioè non è Torino first, è ovviamente Torino, l'università è al centro anche per motivi geografici e non solo, anche di qualità, ma il collegio vuole e deve andare ben oltre i confini di un territorio e di un ateneo. E nel parlare più nello specifico invece di nuovo a Compagnia e a tutte le componenti che sono qua, veramente non posso che sottolineare il successo di questa iniziativa. Io molti di voi sanno, arrivo da un ambiente accademico diverso, quello della medicina, quindi quando ormai più di 4 anni fa sono diventato rettore conoscevo poco la realtà del Carlo Alberto, e Giorgio ed altri mi hanno aiutato a conoscerla, ovviamente all'inizio, poi ho cominciato a conoscerla anche di prima mano e fin dall'inizio ne ho viste le potenzialità, ma in particolare i numeri che ci hai presentato, che sono numeri ma che riflettono, posso dire, non mi stupiscono. Il fatto che non mi stupiscono vuol dire qualcosa, perché sono numeri importanti, sono numeri che quasi uno dice ma saranno veri o se è sbagliato, c'è qualche zero di troppo, ma alla fine per aumentare le unità in decine o in centinaia, sono assolutamente veri. Qualche arrotondamento, ma probabilmente magari a ribasso, conoscendoti, non ti vedo aumentare, ma se c'è qualcosa teniamoci un po' più giù. Ma al netto degli arrotondamenti sono numeri impressionanti che riflettono però una realtà veramente di collaborazione che sta raggiungendo livelli di good practice, secondo me. Qui ringrazio anche un paio di consiglieri di amministrazione che vedo, gli ultimi 2 consigli, quelli che ho nominato io, credo abbiano lavorato benissimo nel garantire un'integrazione tra una realtà accademica forte, sicuramente con grandi prospettive, ma sempre con un rischio di autoreferenzialità, in un qualcosa nel quale devi metterti in gioco e non puoi essere tu al centro, perché quando lavori con qualcun altro non sei solo tu e non sei solo tu a essere davanti. Credo che la difficoltà, chi conosce il mondo accademico, gli studenti lo conoscono al di fuori, chi lo conosce dal di dentro, ma credo anche gli studenti possono vedere, tende alle volte a essere un po' autoreferenziale, essere un po' chiuso in se stesso, e che in questa realtà proprio quello che si vede e si è visto, almeno negli anni, e l'ho visto progredire tra l'altro, non che si partisse da una situazione difficile, ma era sicuramente un qualcosa, e qui il ringraziamento va anche non solo alla governance intesa come consiglio d'amministrazione del nominato ovviamente dai soci fondatori, ma anche proprio alla governance che ha lavorato secondo me benissimo in questo senso. Oggi siamo arrivati a una situazione nella quale quelle possibili aspetti di competitività, di rivalità che si generano in questo campo non solo non sono negativi, ma sono veramente il motore propulsivo di questi numeri che stiamo vedendo, e che se le cose vanno avanti così non posso che credere possano aumentare ancora. Quindi veramente quando parliamo di competitività, di come si gestisce un mondo nel quale, questo va ben oltre anche i confini delle discipline economiche, perché riguarda tutte le discipline, riguarda l'intera gestione del nostro pianeta. Competiamo, ma competere vuol dire che c'è qualcuno che vince, qualcuno che perde. Allora quelli che perdono, che cosa succede? È giusto che qualcuno perda e qualcuno vinca. Ecco, secondo me in questa realtà quello che si vede è che tutti stiamo vincendo, e i risultati si vedono, e tra l'altro vanno ben oltre i confini del collegio, perché i rapporti col territorio sono sempre più evidenti, i rapporti con il resto dell'università, perché originariamente chiaramente i contatti con l'università erano magari più limitati ad alcune discipline molto specifiche delle aree economiche. Oggi con l'ampliamento ai dipartimenti che vanno oltre quelli economici, e sempre di più si sta allargando, sicuramente altro aspetto di forza del collegio, ma anche aspetto di forza per l'università, che ha cominciato tra l'altro a vedere risultati importanti non solo in termini scientifici ma anche di reclutamento. Questo è l'altro aspetto importante. Non hai dato i numeri perché sono in continua evoluzione, io non li ricordo a memoria, ma ormai non si contano più, perché si potrebbero contare, ma sono parecchie unità, se non siamo già ben oltre le 10 di reclutamenti all'interno dell'organico di UNITO, che hanno in qualche modo transitato, spesso con un ruolo cruciale, magari di prima attrazione, quindi il collegio quasi come una sorta di sirena che attrae il ricercatore di alto profilo da tutto il mondo. Con i numeri che abbiamo visto, il ricercatore si trova bene, scopre che lì c'è pure anche un'università di alto profilo, e rimane con tutti gli ovvi vantaggi che questo ha per il nostro sistema accademico, e poi a ricadere su tutto il sistema, perché chiaramente quell'attrattività dei migliori profili porta poi a una serie di vantaggi per tutti, che non è ovviamente qui la sede per dover convincere nessuno di quanto sia importante. Quindi andiamo avanti con questo spirito, e l'impressione che ci possa ancora crescere. Buon anno accademico quindi nuovamente agli studenti e alle studentesse, al corpo docenti, alla governance del collegio, e ci rivediamo tra un anno a raccontare numeri ancora più importanti. Grazie.
Grazie mille Stefano. Grazie mille, e effettivamente devo dire che il rapporto di interazione tra le istituzioni è fondamentale, sta funzionando davvero bene. Abbiamo anche uno slogan che si chiama Bridge to Unito, no? che sono i professori di cui tu parlavi, che poi transitano all'Università di Torino, e questo per noi è molto importante. Grazie mille, grazie Alberto, grazie Stefano, ciao, arrivederci. I think we can switch to English because the rest of the program is in English. And Raffaella, thank you very much for being here with us. Paolo Ghirardato, our dean, will introduce you, and will introduce you to the audience. Paolo.
Ok. So, okay, now we switch to English. So it's our pleasure and honor to have Raffaella Sadun here to give our inauguration speech. We have, as Giorgio has already informed you about, Raffaella has been a member of our board of directors for a while now, and so it's particularly a pleasure to have her physically. This is the first time you have actually physically visited the Collegio, right?
Second time.
Second time, okay. So, okay, so here is as usual, an executive summary of Raffaella's career in one slide. I apologize for for being very curt here. So she is the chair professor of business administration at Harvard Business School. She has distinguished fellowships to the NBR, CEPR. These are important academic affiliations. She has, considering her, her young, her youth in academic terms, 15 years since her PhD, she has 30 scientific publications and 4 top publications. I will be more specific in a few minutes, and an H index of 17 and more than 2,000 citations. For the scientists in the audience, I have to say these are actually very remarkable numbers for economists. I know, people who are used to the hard sciences may be underwhelmed, but this is, this is a very impressive. These are impressive numbers for somebody who has been doing research for 15 years. So this is her path. She graduated from La Sapienza in 2000, went to Pompeu Fabra to get a master, and then to London School of Economics, where she got a PhD in 2008. After LSE, she got a job at Harvard Business School, where she still is. She actually made a very fast career at Harvard, becoming associate professor in 2015, and then a full professor, and in fact now chair professor, Charles E. Wilson Professor of Business Administration in 2019. And she's also the Senior Associate Dean for Publishing, which is actually a title that you will have to explain to me because I don't understand. But anyway, she has an interesting position. Okay, so these are just some of the honors that she has been bestowed, honors and, and different things. So first of all, as I said, she started becoming very soon an NBR Research Associate and then Fellow, CPR. In 2021, she was nominated Grande Ufficiale al Merito della Repubblica Italiana, and in fact, since 2022, she has been working for the government in different forms, one of which I will also, has been mentioned by Giorgio, and I will also come back to. So she was the head of a selection committee for the Progetto Dipartimenti d'Eccellenza. She is the head of a scientific committee for the Fondo Repubblica Digitale, on which I will say a little bit more. She was an advisor to Mario Draghi. Then in terms of other kind of awards, she has been awarded the Premio De Sanctis per le Scienze Economiche, awarded to the best Italian economist under 45. And she has been included in 2023 in the Thinkers 50 list, which is the number 50 should not lead you into a mistake. It is actually the top 30 thinkers in, I guess, in the business world in terms of of their vision about the future of business. She has received many grants. She is a co-editor of the Journal of Law and Economics and Organization and associate editor of Management Science, which is one of the top journals in business. So these are just some of her articles. This, I just chose some of them, first of all, of course, because they are very distinguished publications, but also because they kind of give you an idea of the what Raffaella has been working on. So she has first she has a paper titled "Americans Do It Better: U.S. Multinationals and Productivity Miracle," which is basically at the beginning, in an earlier phase of her career. So basically, she started working. I guess more on international on international business and management, But then we see a paper in 2014, The Distinct Effects of Information Technology and Communication Technology on Firm Organization, which is more related to the research that she's going to be telling us about today. So she was already starting to think about some of these issues at the time. She has also contributed an important paper to health economics, in fact, health business economics, this paper on hospital board and management practices. Then she has a paper whose title I really enjoy immensely, Modern Management, Good for the Environment or Just Hot Air, on the Economic Journal. And in more recent years, she has been working with Oriana, who was also a former vice president of a Collegio and a friend of a Collegio, on basically CEO, like first managing the family firm and then CEO behavior and firm performance. So you know, very, of course, very important in work on at the boundary between business administration and economics. Okay, I like to think that she's an economist. So finally, let me conclude by pointing out what has already been mentioned by Giorgio. So in particular, we want to point out, since we are involved somehow, the Fondo per la Repubblica Digitale, which was instituted in late 2021. It's a public-private partnership between the Italian government and the ACRI, the Association of Bank Foundations. And the mission is, what you read in Italian there, sostenere progetti selezionati attraverso bandi rivolti alla formazione e all'inclusione digitale per accrescere le competenze digitali e sviluppare la transizione digitale del Paese e migliorare i corrispondenti indicatori del cosiddetto DESI. So this is part of a digital objectives of the PNRR. And just to give you one important number, it's providing grants for 350 million euros. That are being allocated, and I want, of course, this is a very important. It plays an important role in our the national PNRR efforts. But I want to underscore the fact that we are also somehow related to it, because thanks to Raffaella, the evaluation lab, which is an important part of a fondo, which is basically doing the ex-ante evaluation of the grants and then the ex-post evaluation of the grants via impact evaluation methods. The evaluation lab is hosted by the Collegio Carlo Alberto, and in fact it is also supposed to collaborate with our impact evaluation unit. I see also the director of evaluation lab here. So it's a great thing for us because we can be, it can actually put the Collegio even more to work on policy, on important policy making. And so now, without any further ado, I'm just going to give the floor to Raffaella. Thank you.
Thank you, Paolo. Bye, Raffaella.
Okay, so good night, everyone. I am really honored to be here for thank you. What the Collegio represents in terms of excellence of economic research, for the fact that this is a young organization that has already done a lot. I am grateful for hosting the Fondo, the Evaluation Lab, who's actually here. They are all sitting here. And I'm also grateful, thank you for telling my kids that I'm actually relatively young and that I've done, some good things in life. So I appreciate it for that too. They're here, sitting here, and I don't think they really capture this point very often, so thanks. As I said, this is the title for this speech is Reskilling in the Age of AI. I think that reskilling is definitely something we are going to talk about in a little bit. I want to get there. But before we get to reskilling, I'd like to take you on a short detour. We'll go a little bit back in history as well, because you need to understand why reskilling is important and why I've been a little bit obsessed with this idea for the past 2 years. And anybody who knows me, they know that if we have a conversation, we're going to talk about reskilling one way or the other. So beware if we ever talk, we're going to talk about it, okay? So reskilling is a very specific type of training. It's it's a type of training that is useful to help people move from occupations that are at risk of obsolescence to occupations that provide better job opportunities. This is a very important type of training, and labor economists are interested in training in general. I'm interested in this specific type of training because at the end of the day, what I do, and the thing that defines all the very different topics that were described just now, is productivity. And so we are going to start talking about productivity, and then we will go into reskilling and how reskilling, what reskilling has to do with productivity. And just to set the tone, the fundamental concepts, productivity, which is the efficiency with which inputs are used, is probably one of the most economic concepts we need to be aware of. Productivity has a couple of very interesting characteristics. First of all, we know that at the country level, as well as within countries, productivity is extremely heterogeneous. You can see it from here. This is just one relation. On the y-axis is total factor productivity, which is one specific measure that it's often used in economics. You can see how varied it is between developed and high-income and low-income countries. But the second reason why we want to care about productivity is because productivity is what drives opportunities. And so the more productive countries, the more opportunities there are, the more it is possible to invest in education, in healthcare, and all the good things that we care about. Now, the issue with, by the way, Adam Smith was obsessed with productivity many, many years ago, so it's been in economics for a long time. The issue with productivity, especially in the past decades, is that it's stopped growing. So this is a graph that refers to the United States. You can see that in recent decades, the total factor productivity, except for a small, short-lived rebound in the 1990s, has actually been declining over time. And this is a factor, this is an issue of concern in policy circles. I think it should be an even more a factor of concern in Italy. This is a graph that shows the trend of total factor productivity in various countries. And it's hard to miss where Italy is. We've lost, not only we haven't grown, but we've declined in terms of productivity growth. This has really important implications for all of us. And we need to understand why this is happening and what we can do about it. Now, I think that there are, of course, many different theories, many different reasons why productivity is not growing, but one of them, and that's the one that is most related to what I'm going to discuss tonight, is the issue of slowing down in the diffusion of technological innovations. And in fact, this is a graph that was produced a couple of years ago by economists at the OECD. And what this graph shows using a very rich micro-level data set is that, in fact, one striking feature of the slowing down in aggregate productivity growth is not so much that we don't understand how to be more productive. You can see that the frontier firms, these are firms that are at the top of the productivity distribution, have been managing to improve their productivity quite a bit over time. The issue is that the other firms, the laggards, for some reasons haven't been able to catch up. And so the issue that we are dealing with, and what I think is an important part of the story that we should understand, is why is it that it's hard for these technological diffusions to move from the top of the distribution to the rest of the distribution. This is the process of technological diffusion. We need to understand what's happening there. So this is the preface, because I think what we're going to do today is getting a little bit deeper into this topic. And so, as I promised, we'll talk about reskilling in just a little bit. But first, just to give you a sense of why technological diffusion may be slowing down, I need to take you in the past, just for a little bit. We'll do a quick detour. Then we'll come to reskilling, and then we'll draw some conclusions and try to understand where we are based on what I'm going to tell you. So that's the plan for the day, for the night, I would say. So let's start with the lessons from past technological waves. You probably have seen graphs of this sort. This is a graph that shows the very rapid explosion of a new technology, which is ChatGPT, this fantastic new platform that was launched just about a year ago. And when we see these graphs and we see these diffusion graphs, ChatGPT in the second graph is the first line, the red line. It gives you, I think, the very misleading impression that once there is a technological innovation, it spreads almost in a frictionless way across the world, across people and across organizations. The adoption rate seems to be almost instantaneous. In fact, what we know is that things are actually quite different. The guy in this slide is Paul David, who recently passed away. He was an economic historian in Stanford and Oxford. And Paul David did some very interesting studies that looked at the diffusion of how the invention and the diffusion of electricity improve productivity in factories. And perhaps this is not a well-known fact, but it took about 30 years from the invention of the dynamo, of the first machines that could be fitted into factories. It took 30 years from that moment to see some productivity improvements. And the type of work that Paul David did is really fascinating because it shows that one of the reasons why this diffusion was so slow is that you didn't need just electricity but to reap its productivity benefits, but you need to reorganize dramatically the factory. In the steam, when the main source of energy was steam and not electricity, the factory was organized all around one central axis, and so the most complicated and the steps of production that needed more energy were very close to the engine, and then they were gradually allocated according to how much energy they needed. So it was very, all central around the machine. And initially, what people did, business people did at that point, they simply replaced the steam engine with the electricity, with the dynamo. And guess what? If you only change the source of energy, but you don't change the whole organization, nothing much happens in terms of productivity. We saw the productivity benefits after 30 years where existing businesses or new businesses were created in a way that made most sense for electricity. And so you see that every machine had its own engine, and they could really maximize productivity because they had reorganized. And this is a process of organizational adaptation to a new technology. It took about 30 years. Now, this is fascinating because, in fact, history repeated itself. And the reason why Paul David wrote this paper is because in the late 80s and early 90s, we were living another technological wave. And at that time, it was ICT, Information and Communication Technologies. There is a very famous article, it was a newspaper article, where Bob Solow first mentioned this. It's been since then it's been labeled the Solow paradox, where you can see the computer age everywhere, but the productivity statistics, because these new technologies, which were fascinating, they could do so many things, but yet nothing was moving in terms of productivity. It took about 30 years, similar to the electricity, similar to the story of electricity, to see the improvements coming from the ICT transformed into productivity gains. This is a graph that I took from a book by Eric Brynjolfsson and Andrew McAfee, which overlays the trends in productivity for these two eras, the electrification era and what they call the second machine age. It's the information and communication technology age. And you can see that things are flat for a while and then they pick up. So from that perspective, we've seen the story again. But also, we've seen this story again because in the latest technological wave of information and communication technology, the effects of productivity have been incredibly heterogeneous. These are some of the papers that were mentioned just now. But what we know from the data is that there has been tremendous heterogeneity in the capabilities that firm had of reaping the benefits of information and communication technologies. I wrote some of these papers. what we see in the data is that companies that were managed in a way that allowed it to match people with different tasks, to reorganize, to really think about new ways of doing business, those are the companies that were able to be more productive as a consequence of their investments in technology. Whereas other companies simply were left behind. These are the laggards that we were discussing just now. We also know that this process, or even better, the absence of a process of organizational adaptation, can also have very important macroeconomic effects. And it's true, I sit at the boundaries between management and economics, because sometimes it's the case that the inefficiencies that we see at the microeconomic level, or the differences in this case of managerial qualities that we see in firms, seems to have very important repercussions for what happens at the level of the economy. And this is what we saw in the past technological evolution. Now, the other piece that we need to think about is why on earth is it so tough to adopt a new technology? And here it's where labor economics comes to help. And in particular, people like David Autor did a fabulous job at really helping us think about the ways in which technologies affect the labor market through the effects that they have on the demand for different types of tasks. In one of his recent papers, he says, the good way, a very useful way to think about technologies is think about a job as a series of tasks and then ask which tasks can be carried out by machines and which by workers. And what you will see is that the adoption of a new technology will have two types of effects. One, it will change the demand for tasks within occupations. It will substitute for some tasks that are codifiable and can be done by machines. But it will also increase the demand for tasks that are non-routine or hard to codify and therefore hard to substitute, and in some instances complementary to the technologies. Think about decision-making, right, or social interactions. These are all complementary tasks to computers. New technologies also create new occupations. There are new roles that can better exploit technologies. And in the US, 40% of employment growth between 1940 and today is actually accounted for by new occupations. So you have to think about this process of organizational adaptation as a process that has profound implications for the labor market, because it changes the demand for tasks and what people are supposed to do to be effective. Since we are in a place with people that work in banks, I thought that a banking example could be helpful to give you a sense of what happens in practice. You probably are all, in the back, you're all too young to remember the introduction of the ATM, where you take cash from a machine. But when the ATM was introduced in banks, two things happened. The first one is that the cashiers were substituted away. This is the job that is now automated by the machine. But the second thing is that new jobs were created. In particular, the greeter, the person that comes and talks to you at the entrance of the bank, that deals with the customer relationship, somebody with social skills that can pull up the accounts and understand who they're dealing with. So this is a process that we've seen over and over again across different industries and across different businesses. Now let me come to the problem, because this is exactly what I think we are about to see with generative AI. It's very early, but on the one hand, I think that the concern here is that generative AI is a technology that can now take on tasks, and many more tasks, that were in previous technological eras were not touched by machines. Because right now with the generative AI, there are tasks that are highly cognitive in nature, sometimes even that deal with very deep expertise, that apparently can be taken on by these new technologies. They reason by analogy. They don't necessarily need to have full codification, but they can do much more than prior technologies. So there is a concern that in this process of complementarities and substitution, jobs that were traditionally traditionally beneficiaries of past technological innovations may now lose because machines may do a better job than humans. And for the first time, we're talking about white-collar occupations such as managers, lawyers, creatives, and so forth. So that's the risk, similar to past technological waves. And then, of course, there is also new opportunities that are created, which is the creation of completely new occupations. Some of you may have already seen prompt engineers. These are people who specialize in how to ask questions to ChatGPT. The demand for different types of digital skills, including prompt engineering, has skyrocketed over the past 2 years. Now, this is the last point before we talk about reskilling, is thinking about the cost of all of this. In past technological waves, when this process was happening, we saw two types of workers benefiting from technologies. Those that were at the very high end of the skill distribution, and those that had jobs that maybe were not really rich in skill content, but they were hard to substitute with machines, non-routine manual jobs. But we also saw that this category here in the middle, it's a category of middle skill occupations. Think about clerks, craft and related trade workers, plant and machine operators, and assemblers. Those are all jobs which experience a dramatic decline in demand. The other cost of this process is that this is not a frictionless process. And in fact, as these demands for different skill progress and move in different directions, companies will experience mismatches. And so we have costs both in terms of what workers experience. Some workers will win and some will lose. But we also see that firms may lose because they are unable to quickly adapt new skills or quickly adapt new technologies. So it is still too early to know exactly in which world we are, whether we are in a world in which AI will do mostly good things for the labor market, or whether it's the dystopian future of full automation. It's unclear where we are. But I think that it's also clear that right now we have options. And so we need to decide what we want to do in this uncertainty. I think that definitely there is one option, which I think it's quite popular somewhere, which is, we should resist this change. This change is scary. Maybe, I see some of the degrowth movements, some new Luddites movements being in this category. We could just let the forces of technological adoption play out without intervention. And this, it may be one course of action. But we also know, based on past experiences, that this is going to be a very slow process, potentially. It can be a costly process. And I think even more concerningly, it may be a process that will not really give us the productivity gains that technology can give us. And this is a point that Daron Acemoglu and Restrepo are making lately, which is, maybe we will see the emergence of so-so technologies, because things will not evolve really in an optimal way. There is some evidence already of this automation that has been done, has been cost-saving, but not really delivering great productivity benefits. And then I'd say the third option, which is an option that I'm very intrigued with, is the idea that maybe we can try to shape the direction of technological adoption, or, and this is where reskilling, I think, comes into play, reduce the cost of adaptation. Now, this is a big aspiration. Shaping the direction of technology is something that is being discussed. Clearly, it's a very high ambition. Reducing the cost of adaptation is also something that is often mentioned, but we really don't understand a lot of how we do this in practice. So this is why I got interested in reskilling. Because in a sense, reskilling, which is, as I said, a very specific form of training that takes people who are at risk of losing their jobs or not having a future in their jobs, and moving these people in a quickly and relatively efficient way, helping them move to new in-demand occupations, is actually quite of an interesting idea. For example, this is happening in some insurance businesses are reskilling actuaries to cybersecurity experts, because actuaries can now, their job can be substituted by AI, but these people have mathematical skills, they have valuable skills, and they're retraining them as cybersecurity experts. I'm working with some automotive companies in Europe who are reskilling their automotive mechanics into electrical engineers. So it's something that is happening, and it has two potential gains. The first one is for firms that they close the skill gaps, facilitating the adoption of new technology, and again for the workforce, helping individuals access new opportunities. According to the World Economic Forum, about 1 billion people in the world might need to be reskilled. So this is what's the potential. And as I said, I was very intrigued by these numbers. I think there is something there. But I have to be honest, I was also very skeptical. And I continue to be quite skeptical. The reason is, doing reskilling right is actually very hard. Let me tell you what the theoretical idea is, and then we can go into what the frictions might be. The idea is actually quite simple. We have a mismatch between workers and firms, and we are going to use training as a way to close this mismatch. We're going to quickly train workers and have them access opportunities in firms where there is a high demand for certain occupations. I'm going to talk about, tonight, I'm going to talk about two frictions that I think are really important. There may be many more, but there are things that over the last year and a half, I've done some process studying, and I want to share with you what we're discovering. The first friction is on the worker side. And the reality is, we don't really know if people want to be reskilled. And actually, if you ask me today if I want to be reskilled as a macroeconomist, maybe the demand for microeconomists will decline over time, who knows? The first feeling that I have is profound fear, okay? And I'm not sure that I want to be retrained this way, even though it's always within economics. But the second friction, which I also want to talk about, is that in fact firms are not really perfect, unfortunately. And so sometimes they don't know what type of training they should roll out. And sometimes they also face, even with the best intention, they face tremendous frictions and complications in implementing reskilling programs. So we're going to cover both ideas. Let me start with the low take-up of high potential training programs. This is where we are starting from. So this is, again, a graph taken from an OECD survey of the adult population. And this question is asking people, is measuring the fraction of people within each country that has taken training programs, on-the-job training programs over the past year, if I remember correctly. And what you see here, and Italy unfortunately is at the bottom of this graph, is that the training take-up is actually quite low. The second point is that training take-up is low, especially for people that need training the most. And so in fact, when you have training programs, the people who are more likely to enroll in these programs are people who need training the least, because they understand the value of, the value of these opportunities. So the question, the fact that low take-up is an issue is not new. I mean, if you talk with people who roll out these programs, they will tell you that this is the reality. But the question is that we don't really understand why. So with my research colleagues and Alexia Delfino, Andrea Garnero, and Sergio Ferreira and Marco Leonardi, we, over the past year and a half, we decided to see if we could understand more about the demand for training. And in particular, we wanted to ask two questions. First of all, who wants to be reskilled? And second, can the demand for reskilling, can the demand for training be shaped by policy? Which is a very important question once you start thinking about active labor market policies. I think we need this evidence because we want to understand how do we reach people who want to be trained? And second, we want to select training programs that have a higher chance of being effective. And third, ideally, we also want to be able to design training programs that are ex ante more promising, rather than just going with whatever the market offers. So how do we do that? We partnered with AFOL Metropolitana, which is one of the largest job centers in Italy. It's based in Milan, of course. And we decided to borrow a technique that is very used in marketing, which is discrete choice experiments. You know how when they try to launch a new product, a new iPhone, they would typically run conjoint analysis or discrete choice experiments to understand what is the willingness to pay for a certain feature. There is nothing complicated about it. The technique is actually quite advanced. But we decided to use a similar approach on job seekers. In this case, it's 1,200 people who are unemployed and are currently looking for a job. And we expose them to three, when we run, this is essentially a survey that they see, and they can make different choices. They make these choices 6 times, and every time they can choose whether they want to be reskilled for 2 very high demand occupations, one in digital, and whether they want to do generic training, think about learning how to use Microsoft or Word, which is needed, but it's not necessarily useful to find a job. Actually, it's considered to be pretty useless by the job center itself, or do nothing. So in practice, they would see, for various times, they would see different versions of these choices. And then they would tell us what they want to do, whether they want to do reskilling, basic digital training, or nothing. And I want to share with you, without getting into the specifics of what we did, what we found. The first thing that we found is that the demand for training and for reskilling is actually very low. Only 1 out of 3 people, 1 out of 3 times, respondents prefer not to do anything. They really don't want training at all. The second finding is that demand for reskilling is actually very heterogeneous across people. And this is not surprising. The problem is it's not possible to pin down whether a person wants to be reskilled or not just based on observables that typically people who work in job centers have, whether they're men or women, whether they're educated, or whether they don't have a college degree. And so there is a ton of unexplained heterogeneity in choices. I'm going to show you just one, which is the difference between men and women. What you see in this graph is this willingness to pay. You should think about it as the proxy for how much people are willing to pay to be trained. That's just one measure of demand. And what you see in this graph is that on average, men have a higher demand for reskilling. They're more likely to choose to be retrained relative to women. But you can also see that the 2 distributions almost overlap. They have a significant overlap, which means that if you were to make a decision on whether to offer somebody a training program just on the basis of gender, you would be missing a lot of information there. The third finding is that information really matters. So we embedded an experiment in this survey. To about 1/3 of the people who were answering this survey, we provided more information. We told them that the occupation was going to give them a certain salary and a certain job finding rate, so a certain probability of finding a job after training. These are information that are available and could be found almost costlessly by the job center. And what we see is that the yellow line here is the part of the sample that was exposed to this experiment. Just providing basic information shifts the distribution and the demand for training by 10%. Basically, this is just a costless intervention that, to our surprise, is not done currently in job centers, which potentially has the potential of convincing more people to be trained. And the last bit that I want to share with you about this study is that policy design is really key. So thanks to the method that we're using, we can measure expected market shares Think about, again, the analogy of you can measure demand, and so you know on the basis of people's preferences, you will know if a certain model of an iPhone will be popular or not, and how it will fare relative to its competitors. You can use exactly the same analogy here. You can see, based on what you've estimated in the model's parameters, what are the different combinations and the different features that are going to lead you to a maximal level of take-up. And so this is the status quo. These are the market shares that you would find if you just took things as they are. The opt-out choice is this green choice here, is the majority. Most of the people would not want to be trained. You can also see that there is the second largest bucket is people who are willing to take this generic training, Word or Office, things that are not really conducive to finding a job. And then the least popular option is reskilling. So that's where we start from. Now suppose that you took this status quo and you just added a training subsidy that is generic and you just provide to everybody. This is what's happening in Italy right now. What you see from this policy is that actually very little changes. You're able to move some people into training, but you're not doing it in a way that is very effective because you're pushing people into training that is generic and therefore of limited utility. Things start to change only once you take a more active approach in curating the type of opportunities that are available to people and giving them more information about the type of career that they can aspire to, or the job finding rate in our study that they can aspire to if they get retrained. It's only when you take this more active role, and especially if you combine it with a subsidy that is linked to specific programs rather than being generic and indiscriminate, that's only the time where you see things really changing quite a bit. So this is telling you that based on what we know of preferences and what aspirations of people, if you really want to change things, and I think in Italy and in many other countries, we might need to change things quite a bit, you really need to be ready to intervene in a much more effective way. And in fact, the two takeaways from these studies are, one, that the decision whether you want to be trained or not is a highly personal one, and it's not easy to capture it using simple demographics like age, gender, education. And so it's really, really important to put yourself in the shoes of who needs to be retrained and think about an effective way to measure personal motivation and aspirations. In fact, the most successful active labor market policies that I've seen in the United States have this element of coaching and being with the worker is very central to the design of these programs. But the second is also that if you want to attack this problem from a policy perspective, it's not enough to just go and subsidize generic training. If you like, you need to get your hands really dirty because you want to understand what type of programs need to be there, the most effective programs, and you also want to be able to curate the supply of training and provide information to job seekers. Now, I think we're just, I want to also give you a sense, I hope I conveyed the idea that there is so much work that needs to be done on the workers' side. I don't want to leave you with the impression that there is nothing to do in firms. And in fact, I believe that there is also a lot of work that needs to be done in firms. And in fact, what I've discovered over the past 2 years is that, especially in large organizations and in firms that have the means of having a structured HR policy, we are seeing increasingly investments in reskilling and in training. However, when you talk to firms, and I'll show you also some more quantitative results based on surveys, you will also see that the type of frictions that I just described, for example, the low take-up rate, is something that is happens very often also in private organizations. Wonderful programs are being launched, they're being created and paid for. However, the take-up for these programs is very low. And in particular, one thing that is also fascinating is that even within the same firm, you may have uneven support across different parts of the organization. One of the one of the roles that has often come up in the work that I've done so far is that of middle managers. And so middle managers are this key figure that translates to the workers why they should be trained and sort of motivates them to get into training, hires people who have been trained or rewards, and lets people take time to train. So they have a very important role to play. We actually went to the data and we exploited personal data on 3 different companies. This is work in progress with Jorge Tamayo. It's about 5 million observations in total, and the beauty of this information is that you can understand from the micro-level data what is the systematic difference in the attitude of training people within the same firm across different managers. We call it managerial value added. And across these 3 companies, what we find is large, in some cases, very large differences within the same company in how much managers, middle managers, train their workers. And mind you, these are companies that send exactly the same message to their middle managers. It's a centralized policy that gets rolled out and executed very differently across different firms. What we see is that if you, by chance, are allocated to one of these high training people who are in this part of the distribution, you have a much higher chance of being trained yourself. Now, we talked with companies to get a sense of, how do you roll out these programs? What can you do to maximize the efficiencies of these programs? And we found some interesting patterns. This is coming from a small sample of 35 firms, but you should think of these firms as being very large. These are global multinational firms with hundreds and thousands of employees working for them across 11 industries and 4 continents. And what they told us is that, first of all, it was very difficult for them to design effective reskilling programs. And once they did, what was key for them was to shift the paradigm of training. It was never just doing one thing that helped them being more effective. It was doing several things at the same time. What were these 5 things? It started from the top. Often in different organizations, there is willingness to do training almost as charity. So you do it because it's a corporate social responsibility type of investment that you make, and you're not really communicating that this is a strategic imperative and something that you do to achieve business objectives. That changes dramatically how the program is perceived in the firm. The second, if you like, mistake, maybe prevalent practice now, is to bound reskilling within the HR function. And I hope we don't have many people working in the HR function tonight. I'm not sure. But those type of messages also don't go very well in the organization. Because if you present something as just HR, you don't have sometimes HR is not very powerful in a firm. So you really need to make sure that the practice and your message is shared across different functions in the firm. The third piece is that it's often presented just as training and not as a change management initiative, meaning the incentives need to be aligned, how you select people, how you retain people, how you make sure that people understand what happens to their career has to be incredibly clear. And then what I think is really crucial is engaging the employees in a completely different way. Rather than just dumping a training program from the top to the rest of the organization, in these firms, there was much more effort in understanding, putting yourself in the employee's shoes. Going back to the first study, why take-up is so low, they really tried to understand this piece, and they worked very hard to enroll their employees. And the last bit, which I think is also quite interesting, we've seen a lot of collaborations along the supply chain, so people that were working even with their competitors to do better. In practice, as this is work in progress, of course, these people that we spoke with, these 35 firms, are outliers. And in fact, as we go and measure whether the practices that we found in our interviews are actually shared and used across more representative sample of firms, we find that in the majority of firms, these type of practices are still very rare, in particular engaging with the employees. So this tells you that there is a frontier of reskilling, going back to one of the first graphs that I was showing you, but most of the organizations are still quite far. And so the question is, how do you bring them to that frontier? The last bit that I'll say about this work is that very often there is absolutely no measurement of these investments. And we're talking about significant investments, millions of dollars that are being spent in training. this is again, this is work that comes from a survey of about 1,200 companies. The vast majority of cases, there is absolutely no, even no attempt of measuring return of investment in this type of interventions. And since there is very little evaluation, there is very little learning. So I'll conclude from this. The two implications are, the first one is that I do believe that firms can play a major role in reskilling, but this is a difficult problem. And so since it's a difficult problem, it needs a different organizational approach. It will be very hard to attack this problem just with idiosyncratic investments. It will actually be important to think about all these complementary movements that I was just describing. And the first one is that there is so much investment and so little learning because nothing is measured. And so if we really want to move, this applies also, of course, to public policy, but if we want to move the needle, it will be essential to generate robust evidence and make sure that, that there is learning that can spread the reskilling best practices. So let me conclude with a couple of thoughts. I hope, we're going now full circle from the very beginning. Reskilling is important if we want to think about productivity. This is the connection that I'd like you to take away from this talk. And that's because if we want to have, having an appropriately skilled workforce is absolutely necessary for this process of organizational adaptation and technological adoption. I think that there is potential in reskilling. There is great potential. It could potentially help both firms and workers. So there is a dual objective here that is possible and sometimes is actually realized. But this is a very difficult problem, and it presents formidable challenges, including the fact that we don't know enough about demand, and what we know seems to suggest that there is low demand for reskilling. But I think also importantly that firms often lack the organizational capabilities that would allow for these massive projects to really be effective. I'll conclude by saying that it's, of course, not just firms or workers. There is a policy discussion here to be had too. And in fact, I think that we could make a lot of progress, even from a policy perspective, if we finally looked at this problem as a systemic issue and not something that just requires one or two levers to be pulled. But I also think, and this takes me to the discussion we had about the Fondo Repubblica Digitale, it's extremely important if we want to make progress to continue experimenting, but most importantly to learn. And here is where policymakers can really have an important effect, because they could help align stakeholders. This is, if we recognize that this is a societal problem, we should be able to align workers, firms, and training providers around concrete and tangible objectives. I think we can curate the market for training, which is currently marred by informational asymmetries. And I think even more importantly, we can commit to an evidence-based approach to identify, scale, and reward the most promising experiments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Raffaella. This was really a fascinating lecture. We have Maurizio Molinari, who is with us. And Maurizio is the editor of Repubblica, and he has kindly accepted to conclude and to comment Raffaella's lecture. Thank you very much, Maurizio. And this is really part of how we work, no? In essentially research-based lectures and dissemination. That's why it's very important that also who works in newspaper and journalists are involved in our panels and our gatherings, because we want to disseminate, and I think that what we learned from Raffaella is really interesting and sets a path for the future. Maurizio.
Thank you so much. We have to be thankful to Professor Raffaella Sadun for the amount of information that she gave us in this occasion, for the clarity that she had in giving some key suggestions, but allow me to say that we, especially, we have to be grateful for the three main points that has been raising thanks to this presentation. And I may start from these 3 points that basically are the responsibility. If the reskilling is the challenge that we are facing as a national society in trying to bring innovation again, inside our labor market, and more in general inside the production system. There are three main actors that she described that have different responsibilities. Of course, firms, of course, policymakers, but I'd say, and I believe this is one of the key things that she pointed out, the responsibility of the individuals. Why firms? Because, of course, firms today have to take, as she said, very difficult decisions in terms of how organizing, how to reach out to people that in many occasions they don't want to be reskilled. They have to admit the need of the reskilling, and they have to organize something that is very difficult to do. For instance, I may speak for GEDI, that is the biggest Italian publishing group that is facing exactly the situation that Professor Sadun just described. Then there is, of course, the question mark about the responsibility of the policymakers, and we have here to be very honest with us, and we have to wonder if the government that we have been having in this country in the last 10 years are actually, they were and are aware of the need to face and to tackle this challenge in terms of how many resources they have to apply. But then this is the key, because it's something that I feel and I see every day. The basic data that impressed me very much in observing the slides that she brought to us this evening is the resistance of the single human beings to reskilling. Why people are against? Why are they resisting? Why they don't want to do it? If you are part of the labor market, if you risk to lose your job because you need to be reskilled, why are you against? Why not to do it? Now, this is the key, I believe, from my personal observation point, this is the key of the whole thing. So we are facing, and not, I believe, only in this country, but also in other advanced economy, the reality where a huge number of people, they feel so comfortable where they are, that even if you go to them, you explain to them that they have to be reskilled to save their perspective, their hopes, their family, what is more important for them, they don't want to do it. They want to stay in their comfort zone. We have, and she also suggested this, to reach out to them. When she needs, we need a village. I fully agree. I fully agree about this. How did I understand the expression, we need a village? Because if you gather some people that are in charge of a particular organization, working organization, you gather them, you explain to them, and you bet on the fact that some of them, they will accept their reskilling. So maybe there may be a kind of contagious mechanism to push the others to do the same thing. So maybe the others will see the single one that will raise the hand and say, yes, I want to do it, even if it's difficult, even if I have to go back to study, even if I have to rethink about what professionality is for myself, but I want to do it. So maybe the first one, maybe the second one, and then we can build a dynamic inside any single workplace that maybe push more people to accept this challenge. This is where we are. We are in a situation where personal responsibility is key for innovation in the global market of labor and, allow me to say, of knowledge. So this is the message that I got that I want to share with you. It's difficult, it's very honest to say and very courageous to say, but you know, sometimes in life you have to have the courage to dare to do things that others will be not in a position to do. Once I had the chance to meet Shimon Peres when he was still alive, and I asked him, how did you build the state of Israel? I mean, in 1948 it was so difficult. You were so few, no resources, no hope, surrounded by enemies. And he looked at me and said, I will tell you a story. I said, yes, please. What is the story? I was in this small bus in the middle of the Negev desert with David Ben-Gurion. We were alone. This bus was falling apart. It was a disaster bus. There was no hope that even the bus arrived to the destination. And I asked him, I said, David, how we are going to do this? Even this bus? And he told me, you have to have the courage to dare. Il coraggio di osare. This is the key. It was then to build a nation that didn't exist, and it's still today the main lesson to face the global, huge, and ambitious challenges that we are facing, and that they start with the reskilling, as Professor Raffaella Sadun explained to us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This works? Yes. Thank you very much, Maurizio. This was very insightful, and thank you very much, Raffaella. I think there is one little thing that I would like to add, and then we give we ask the floor if there are any questions, and I'm sure there will be many. The problem is that we're living in a world of uncertainty. So when we have to define what firms have to do in order to reskill, and what workers have to do in order to reskill themselves, we really don't know. There is not certainty. It's very difficult. It's very difficult to really identify the line on where to proceed. And this is why, in the end, I think what will happen is that the people who are more keen in reskilling, more willing to reskill, and the firms who are more keen in reskilling are those who are at the top of your productivity distributions, being them individuals or being them firms, okay? So the risk is that this process of reskillings will really happen and will be at the top until a technology will be more consolidated, as you were explaining about electricity. Then people started understanding that they have to reshuffle the plants and to redo everything in order to adopt electricity, okay? So what I'm really concerned is that in this big technological transition we are facing, we will essentially concentrate this process of reskilling and training just on the top ladders of productivity and skills and competence, precisely because only few people really understand that they have to go in that direction. And the key challenge is, besides those that are really daring, is how to make sure that all the others follow in these patterns. And maybe the village works because they see the example, as you say, and maybe we'll have some Shimon Pereses around that will lead the way, but it's not an easy task. So in that sense,
So I want to say that I completely agree. And in fact, this is what we are seeing now. At the same time, I think you as a firm can add a ton of clarity to the process. And we've seen companies that, for example, specify what your career will look like in jobs where we know with some certainty that there will be a future for you. People still don't understand it because it's never explained to them. So that's like point number one. There is a lot that can be done in terms of clarity. And point number two, I think what you just described plays not only at the firm level, it plays at the country level. You know, the divergence that we've seen, it's an expression of what you were describing, and I think that this is urgent. Lastly, and you studied something very interesting a few years ago, you studied a supply chain intervention, which added certainty to small companies, right? This is the type of approach that I think has more future because it can really help identify what's needed at an industry level and also help firms and workers cope with uncertainty.
Yeah, there is this issue of leaders and laggards cooperating in this process. The village should work in this respect, you know, and without industries and sectors. I'm sure there are a lot of questions from the floor. Who wants to break the ice and ask the first sector? Guido, you are the rector of Il Politecnico. I'm sure you have a lot of ideas about reskill. How do we have to reskill the world? Not only firms, but the world, I'm sure.
I want to ask you one thing. Europe has a reduction also of the low knowledge-intensive works as a consequence of the entrance of the artificial intelligence. Central Europe was the only side of the world where you don't just have a reduction of the middle wage jobs, but also of the lower. And Italy in particular, I know from other studies, is the worst in this. I attributed that to the presence of the black work and the hidden economy, but I don't know. I don't understand this peculiar feature. You remember what you?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about, but I don't understand it either.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, grazie.
I'm sorry, was that a great answer?
A question from there.
Hi, I have a question for the professor, please. Three fast questions. So first, does exist people does not needs reskilling, but they lead the change. They continuously reskill themselves, so they move forward. Maybe yes, maybe no, I don't know. And second, how or if moving from a wolf society to a teal organization society, how does it affect the reskilling needs or willingness to be reskilled, and how reskilling have impact on the distribution of power? You know, internal the organization, there's different type of holding the power.
Yeah.
And if you have to be reskilled, how that impact on the old schools, maybe management power?
I'll start with the last one because I think that that's actually critical. I believe that the problem we are seeing is that there is resistance, not only among the workers, but among middle managers, in the sense that their job may change completely. If you think about what these technologies can do, they can now encroach on certain tasks that were, before they were just completely dominated by humans. There was no other possibility. So what I'm seeing in some firms, and it goes back to the laggards and the frontier, is active experimentation in making sure that technology is a complement to the manager and not a substitute. I'm working with a company that is testing the use of AI to innovate, so in the R&D department, and also as ways to help middle managers accept that there is something about their way of doing work that will change. So, it is a problem, but there are ways to address that problem.
There is a question there in the front. Angelo?
Angelo Cappetti. Thank you very much, Giorgio, for the lecture and for the invitation. Thank you, Professor Sadun, and thank you, Maurizio. I agree and thank you for the excellent presentation you made. What Maurizio said before is absolutely correct. There is a sort of, after 37 years of work that I've done in my life, I can say that there is a sort of shared responsibility. People very often do not want to be reskilled because they live in a comfort zone. And since here there are a lot of young people, don't forget that. Do not live in a comfort zone. In Italy, for a very long time, we have lived in a comfort zone, and it is not affordable any longer. But there is a sort of shared responsibility. I work for Confindustria, so for an organization for entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs have responsibility in that sense, because they didn't push enough for reskilling in history. So they must continue to push. And let us say, I don't know if there is, if there are people from the unions here, but let us say there is another shared responsibility for unions for not pushing themselves, people to be reskilled and entrepreneurs to make that. But in the future, we must need this reskilling much, much more. Guido Saracco knows it very well, and you, Giorgio, you teach, and also Professor Nun, Maurizio, and newspapers know very well. So this is absolutely mandatory. We must have a reskilling. Thank you.
I don't know if I'm brave enough, but I got a question concerned with the designing of this reskilling, because it's one of those tasks that cannot be demanded to a computer, the designing of reskilling. Yeah. And that is really one of the key. And I was just imagining how to do that, And yes, it's true, policy making, somebody that knows people in human department, human resources, as well as people that they know how to develop technology. So perhaps it's more of a quest for research, education, academics, universities, perhaps to in a humble way to get into the production as applied to show how to do that, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what you're doing.
Let's see.
Thank you very much. We take another question here from the students, because I want to hear from them, then maybe you can answer, and another one. We have two other questions. Can you pile up 4 questions?
Thank you.
Thank you very
I
much.
actually have a question for the professor. I had a reskilling during the COVID. Sorry.
Okay.
And I had a course, and I think like the channel through I was found was through Instagram or the website of Intesa San Paolo, because it was a program backed by them, and I did it. But now I think like thinking about reskilling, I never see programs like targeted through channels to, I don't know, my mother kind of. Sorry, my mother or somebody in more like advanced stage, but they are always targeted towards really young students, my age, maybe my little brother is just finished high school. So maybe is there a way to improve also how people are targeted on more advanced stages for the reskilling programs?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Last question there. I want to remind you that we have a cocktail upstairs after.
So I'm the last thing between the cocktail and the question. Very, very quick. Thank you very much for your presentation. I have a point about the individual and the willingness to move outside of the comfort zone. My experience, I work at Politecnico, is that technology is becoming more and more complex. So reskilling cannot be based on a simple training. Usually it's a very long process. You made some example, accounting and cybersecurity. The basic discipline behind those jobs are completely different. And I think it's hard to move people, to reskill people to that extent. So there is a limit given by the development of the technology that we cannot manage, simply we cannot manage. The question could be, is it rational to give access education to people in order to become more flexible? And so it could be a decision of policy, so we give you more basic background so that you can be more flexible and smarter in managing changing in technology, and you can be reskilled easily in the future. That could be one question. There is another aspect you didn't mention about artificial intelligence that bring jobs on recent jobs on how you can use artificial intelligence for moving experience from the expert to the beginners very quickly. And that scares me a lot, much more than reskilling and other issues.
Yeah. Should I answer all three?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So I want to answer the first question on academics getting involved. I totally agree. In fact, at HBS, we created a digital reskilling lab, and all we do is partner with companies that want to learn. And they've already decided that they want to invest in training or reskilling, and we help them evaluate using randomized control trials or similar counterfactual methods whether what they're doing is working and how, and the mechanism. So this is already happening for the younger people here. Organizational economics is the discipline where you do these things. It's very exciting because there is so much you can do, and it's possible to work with organizations. As you were saying before, the partnerships that you're doing with firms, they open up so many research opportunities. It's really fascinating. The second question was about age and why not for older people. Unfortunately, the demand for reskilling declines with age. And you can imagine why. You have a shorter time period to recoup the investment. Having said that, I go back to Maurizio's point, which is, I imagine that a choice that is very tough if you do it by yourself could be easier or more feasible if you were to do it in a cohort model, where you have other people that have faced similar challenges. And in fact, there are some programs in the US, sectoral employment programs, that are using this cohort approach. and it seems to be more effective than just letting people make these choices on their own. And on the last point on the design, I think I disagree with the fact that you need to necessarily have deep technical knowledge to move to a new occupation, because some of occupations actually don't require a lot of knowledge on how to code or how to change the machines, but they require the ability to interact with the machine, which today doesn't necessarily you don't need to have a computer science degree. I'm not talking about becoming an engineer. That's a very different career pathway. On that, I would agree with you. But there are many jobs that are actually doable without a deep technological expertise. And these are opportunities, again. And I would say, I think maybe the broader point is we need to understand who we want to reskill, and we need to have clarity on which occupations are worth the investment. It cannot be something that you do just in a superficial way. It's a much broader discussion of what you need at the level of the industry, what you need at the level of the firm. And I will tell you with certainty that there are many occupations that are currently available to people that maybe don't even have a college degree, but we just haven't unlocked how to train people.
Thank you very much. I think we can conclude. All this would not have been possible with all the great staff of Il Collegio that works really much harder than the professor, I must say. So thank you very much. Drinks upstairs for we celebrate Happy New Year and the coming festivities.